I struggled with all my strength, but they laid me on the sacrificial altar. No, please, let me go. Mom. Dad, why don't you interfere? The freakout was already reaching for my throat. Is this the end? And I had so many plans for my new life. It all started when we moved here. On the first day, I told the whole class that I wanted to be a class president, and no one seemed to like it. My classmates called me an upstart and locked me in the locker room after class. I thought I was going to stay there until morning, but my classmate Kurt rescued me. He said that he was also locked in the school closet. After that, Kurt began to choke. I was so scared. He took the inhaler out of his pocket, but his hands were shaking so badly that he dropped it. I immediately picked it up and gave it to Kurt. When he felt better, he said that he was excited by the memory of the closet. From stress, he sometimes had asthma attacks. Afterward, Kurt walked me home. I was in a great mood. I think I had a friend, and I told him he could come to me whenever he wanted. In the evening, when we were going to have dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Kurt, with his parents. It was strange that Kurt came unannounced, and with his parents, but I was glad to see him anyway, and invited them inside. Over dinner, my parents and Kurt became very friendly. They gave us a book about the Aztecs and invited us to the book club. They said that at the next meeting there, they would discuss how sacrifices helped enlightenment. I thought it was very strange to discuss such a thing in a quiet suburb, but my parents really liked it at the club. They began to disappear there and made many friends. After one meeting, my mother brought a bottle of red, smelly liquid and said it was a rabbit blood. Yes, that's what I believe. Not funny at all, Mom. But at dinner, she put it in my face. She said it was good for the body and soul. I flatly refused to drink it. A couple of days later, Kurt called and invited us to spend a weekend at his family estate. All the members of the book club would be there. My parents were happy, and I didn't want to go to the fart party. I was afraid of hurting Kurt. Besides, I'd never been to the family estates, so I agreed. Kurt's country house was huge, a whole castle in the middle of the forest, surrounded by a high fence. Near the entrance, the guards asked me to hand over my phone. Kurt explained that otherwise, the internet would distract from live communication. I had to give my phone to these big guys. We were invited to lunch. I saw huge tables with white tablecloths and my parents at one of the tables. They motioned for me to sit next to them. What a solemn atmosphere. I hope they bring me something delicious. I'm so hungry. But they brought us glasses with a thick red liquid. I immediately refused to drink it. Then some crazy old man started yelling at me, saying that I didn't respect the traditions of the community. It was the elixir of youth, rabbit blood. So Mom wasn't kidding. To drink blood? No way. I won't. Are you crazy? The guards immediately grabbed me and led me out from the table. What's going on here? I called my parents, but they didn't even turn around. I tried to pull away, but my vision suddenly blurred. I woke up in a rabbit cage. How did this happen? I panicked, but I couldn't move. The cage was so cramped. My whole body ached from the awkward position. Why are you doing this to me? Suddenly, Kurt appeared out of the darkness with a bunch of keys. He saved me again. I started to run, but Kurt stopped me. It turns out that I insulted all the members of the club by not drinking rabbit blood. It was sacred, and the rejection of it promised the whole community misfortune. What nonsense! Kurt said that he was scared himself. There was nothing like this at the previous meetings. But it was too dangerous to run now. The whole area was guarded and we'd better think about how to pass unnoticed. He was probably right. Kurt led me into the house. They were all wearing animal masks, moving rhythmically to some strange music. A man in a mask with horns came up to me and asked me if I realized everything. I immediately asked for forgiveness. After that, I was told that I would have to make amends tomorrow. The community had already found some kind of task for me. In the morning, all the guests dragged some heavy iron cases out of the basement and put them in the cars. I was already exhausted. Suddenly, I stumbled and dropped one case. My parents immediately shouted at me to be careful. When everyone left for lunch, I decided to find out what was so valuable inside these cases. I opened one of them, and there were bloody human organs inside. Heart, lungs, I touched it with trembling hands. They were so cold and slimy, I almost threw up. I've got to get out of here. I couldn't find a place until nightfall. I flinched at every rustle, afraid that someone would come for me. I was beginning to think Kurt had left me. He knocked on my door after midnight. Kurt found a gap in the fence, and we needed to run right now. We were almost to the fence when I heard the guard's footsteps. They were getting closer. Damn it. We hid behind the rose bushes. The thorns bit painfully into my arms. I couldn't help but cry out. The guard immediately pointed his flashlight at us. This was the end. Then Kurt picked up a rock from the ground and threw it in the direction of the road. The guard turned around and headed there. And we ran as fast as we could. When the estate was already far away, we decided to take a break. I had no strength left and it was terribly hot. We sat down on a fallen tree and Kurt took off his hoodie. His inhaler fell out of his pocket. I picked it up and was about to put it back when I saw the phone light up in his pocket. Kurt, where is it from? Kurt, are you with them? I jumped up and backed away. And Kurt gave me a nasty smile. I was paralyzed with fear. I ran with the last of my strength, and everything went dark. I woke up on Kurt's shoulder. He was dragging me deeper into the woods. My hands were bound by his hoodie. Let me go! I tried to pull away, but he only got angry. He said that I was honored to be chosen, that my kidneys and heart would serve the stronger and more worthy. Then I remembered the organs in the cases. I started kicking and screaming for him to let me go, but it was no use. He wasn't listening to me. Just then, Kurt carried me out into a large clearing. In the middle was a huge bonfire, next to which was an altar. It was surrounded by people in white robes, the same guests I'd seen at dinner. As soon as they noticed Kurt, they bowed oddly in front of us. For a moment, it was very quiet. Even rabbits in the huge cases did not make a sound. 2 guards grabbed me and dragged me to the altar. No, please, don't. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my parents among the cultists. Mom, Dad, why don't you do anything? But they didn't even look in my direction. Their eyes were fixed on Kurt, who was following me regally. I was forced down on the altar, and the rope was tightly tied around my arms. I was shouting for them to let me go. But then Kurt came up to me and the cultists started shouting his name. No, Kurt! Don't you dare touch me! His face was covered in sweat, and his hands were reaching for my throat, second by second, getting closer and closer. When suddenly, he coughed and began to choke. This was my chance. I struggled to free my hand. Isn't that what you're looking for? I was clutching the inhaler Kurt had dropped on the way. Let me go and you'll get it back. Kurt was frantically gasping for air. He just toppled over from suffocation. In the end, he turned pale and grabbed a huge cage to keep from falling. With his last breath, he nodded so that they released me. After the guards took the ropes off me, I threw the inhaler with all my might somewhere in the darkness of the night. Holding his throat, Kurt followed, disappearing into the trees. And then the cultists began to surround me. Their eyes glittered from under their hoods. I couldn't find a single drop of humanity in them. Cultists were coming from all sides. It felt like they were going to tear me apart with their hands. I was trapped. Their hands were almost touching me. But when they came close, then they suddenly dropped to their knees. My father said that I had taken power from the last priest, and from that day on, they would worship me. The cultists fell silent at my feet, waiting for the order. What a turn! I turned to where Kurt was crawling in the dark. What a pathetic rabbit. Grab him, I ordered. I followed my lover Ethan to the locker room, and he had been stuck there for an hour now. I peeked inside cautiously, but there was no one in the locker room. And then I saw Ethan come out of the locker. With a strange smile, he headed for the exit. I barely managed to hide behind a pillar, and he didn't notice me. And when he was out of sight, I went into the locker room. I examined his locker with interest. There was nothing special. What was Ethan doing here then? Then I noticed red handprints on the back wall. Was that blood? I got into the locker to examine them. In a panic, I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I beat on it with my fists. I would suffocate here. I leaned against the back of the locker to catch my breath. And suddenly, I felt that I was falling somewhere. No! But let me tell you how it all started. 2 months ago, I was brought to a new orphanage. The last one was closed due to the emergency condition of the building. I wasn't too upset. It was lousy. I was a mousy girl with no friends, and I barely remembered my parents. They died in a car accident when I was 4. I was playing at home with my favorite doll when a woman from custody came for me. And I had to spend 13 years in this terrible orphanage. So I didn't expect anything good from the new orphanage, but suddenly, I found a kindred spirit there, Kate. We were roommates. She lost her parents to the accident too, and it brought us closer together. Kate was kind and brave. She often protected me from the jokes of the other guys. And she also noticed that I liked Ethan, everyone's favorite in the orphanage. This guy studied hard and even helped out in the library. He was a handsome man. And there was something mysterious about him. Yes, I fell madly in love with him. But I was afraid that he would reject me, so I watched him from afar. Kate also tried to dissuade me from that, saying that it was not safe to go around the orphanage alone. She said there was a legend in the orphanage. Every year, a girl disappeared in it. But I didn't believe it, and I kept watching Ethan. I began to notice something strange. He could stay in the locker room for hours. And when he went back to his room, he kept looking around, like he was hiding something. I wanted to tell Kate about it at dinner, but for some reason, she didn't come. I began to look for her in the orphanage, but she seemed to have disappeared. Maybe she was in the yard. I was on my way there when I saw Ethan sneaking into the locker room again. Curiosity got the better of me and I decided to follow him. So, do you remember how I fell into the locker? Because of my curiosity, I ended up here in Ethan's secret hideout. Rubbing my bruised knee, I stood up and groped for the light switch. The light came on and I saw a small room with one bed, a floor lamp and curtains on the wall without a window. Oddly enough, the bed was littered with a mountain of teddy bears. Ethan was past that age. Why did he need toys? Then I noticed someone's pass to the library on the floor. I stepped closer and flinched. The pass was Kate's, and there was blood on it. I remembered the red prints in the locker and was horrified. God. What had Ethan done to Kate? I needed to get out of here. But then I heard footsteps and the creak of a locker door. Ethan was back. Not knowing where to go, I quickly turned off the light and ran to the curtain. Just as I was hiding, Ethan came into the room. He turned on the floor lamp and began to walk slowly around the room. I wish he hadn't noticed me. Then I saw a streak of light falling on my feet. Damn, the curtain was too short. I hoped Ethan wouldn't find me. But suddenly I heard him coming closer. I couldn't move in horror. But at the last moment, Ethan swerved off somewhere. Just as I let out my breath, the curtain was yanked back, and Ethan was staring at me, angry. What are you doing here? He hissed angrily. His eyes were wild. I started babbling about trying to find my books, but Ethan cut me off. He shouted that he didn't like being lied to and pulled the scotch tape from behind his back. I need to teach you to mind your own business, he whispered. My stomach turned cold. He was crazy? Where did that cute guy I fell in love with go? I started for the door, but Ethan blocked my way. What should I do? I looked around. There was a bulky floor lamp nearby. This would delay him. With all my strength, I pushed it against Ethan and ran out of the room. Ethan quickly came to his senses and ran after me. I raced away from him through the winding corridors. It looked like I was going to shake him off, but Ethan kept up. As I ran, I turned around and suddenly bumped into someone. The principal of the orphanage. I was saved. He started to tell me off about running around the halls, but I cut him off. It's Ethan. He's crazy and he's chasing me. However, the principal smiled and said that I was making it up. Ethan was the most obedient child he had ever had at the orphanage. He definitely didn't care about running around the halls. No, you don't understand. I told the principal about the bloodstained prints in Ethan's locker and Kate's bath, but he wouldn't listen to me. He told me to go back to my room quickly. But sir, I began, but the principal rudely interrupted me, saying that there was a severe penalty for libel here. It was useless to argue. So I trudged into the room. I was hoping to see Kate there, but she wasn't there all night long. Her bloodstained past was in front of my eyes. Sweet Kate, she was the only one who had been kind to me. I shuddered to think what Ethan had done to her. The next day, she didn't show up, and rumors spread around the shelter that no one had seen Kate since yesterday. Only I knew what had really happened to her. I had to stop that crazy Ethan. No one else would be harmed by his hands, but I needed hard evidence. I decided to go back to the locker room for her pass. I need to show it to the principal. That way, he would believe Ethan was responsible for Kate's disappearance and turn him into the police. But the locker was closed. I tried to crack it with a wire and I kicked it, but it was useless. I had to look for other evidence to expose Ethan. And then I remembered the legend of the missing girls. That same evening, I decided to dig into the archives of the orphanage and learn something terrible. It turned out that apart from Kate, 3 girls had disappeared in the past 3 years. I also decided to look at Ethan's personal file. It turned out that the first girl disappeared just the year he arrived at the orphanage. Goosebumps ran down my skin. And when I came out of the archive, I noticed that someone was watching me from behind a curtain. It was Ethan. I barely managed to blend into the crowd so I wouldn't get caught. It looked like Ethan wanted to rub me out as the witness. It was uneasy, but I knew I couldn't give up. I needed direct evidence that he was responsible for the missing children. So the next morning, I crept cautiously into the room where Ethan lived. He and his neighbor were supposed to be on duty, but the thought of Ethan catching me made my blood run cold. I had already rummaged through all the cabinets in his room when suddenly I found library passes right in the bedside table. They had the names of the missing people on them, and even Kate's. I almost screamed in horror. There was no doubt that Ethan was guilty. I quickly grabbed the passes and ran to the principal. My heart was pounding. I had to hurry. I wasn't far from the principal's office when I noticed Ethan leading a girl toward the locker room. A new victim? I decided to take him red-handed and record everything on video, so he definitely would not get out of it. I walked at their heels. They went into the locker and the door slammed shut. I tiptoed over to the locker with my phone and opened the door. I was already leaning against the narrow crack in the secret room, but then the hinges creaked treacherously. Ethan froze and listened, but after a second, he continued to chat pleasantly with the student. I almost got caught. But then my phone vibrated. I got a text message with some spam. Heck. Ethan heard that, and he came straight to me. I shot out of the locker room and ran to the principal. Ethan chased after me and grabbed my arm at the office. With difficulty, I managed to escape, opened the door, and ran inside. Thank God, Ethan was left outside. I started talking about the missing girls in Ethan's locker. To prove my point, I pulled a stack of passes out of my pocket and showed the principal the video I'd just taken on my phone. He was about to believe me. But at that moment, there was a knock on the door. Ethan came into the office. I staggered to the side in surprise, and he smiled at me as if nothing had happened. Ethan said that he had heard what I had said about him, and he explained that he was only helping the girls catch up on literature. That's what the secret room was made for. The girls themselves did not disappear anywhere. They were simply taken to new families. But what about the blood in the locker? I asked. Dumbfounded, Ethan grinned and said it was red gouache for a library poster. This was nonsense. Ethan made it up. I started screaming that Ethan was a liar and a psycho. The principal and Ethan looked at each other and took my arms. I struggled. They were clearly in cahoots with each other. I never had such a tantrum. I started choking and passed out. I came to myself in a strange place. People were wandering around in the same clothes. The doctor took my hand and told me that I was having paranoid attacks and needed treatment. What? I was healthy. I pulled away from his hand and tried to run away, but I was quickly pinned down and injected with something. I woke up in a straitjacket. Apparently, I ended up in a mental hospital. I was drugged, and after a couple of days, it seemed to me that I had gone too far with surveillance. Ethan could really help these girls. And everyone thought he was a great guy. A week later, I was on the mend. They even promised to let me go soon if I behaved as well. And then one day, I saw a familiar silhouette in the corridor. Ethan, he was wearing a straitjacket, and under his arm was a teddy bear, one of the ones I saw in the secret room. I was paralyzed. Ethan smiled and came over to me and whispered, "You're right. I did this to Kate and the others. Now guess who's next?" If you are reading this, then I am no longer alive. I was recently adopted by Bill and Irene Morris, but I know something. They want to sell me for organs. All the children disappear from their beds. Talk to Miss Larkin. On my first day at the foster home, I found this note under my bed's mattress. The kids who had been adopted with me were running around, and I stood there, frozen. My new parents, Bill and Irene, seemed strange to me. When I first met them, they were silent and quiet, as if they were hiding something. The door creaked open and Irene poked her head in and called me for breakfast. I quickly shoved the note back under the mattress and hurried downstairs to find out what was going on. As I was going down the stairs, I noticed the closet door was ajar, so I decided to look inside. In the dim light, I could make out several cots, each with their names painted on it: Johnny, Liz, Annie. But there was no one with such names among the adopted children. Whose beds are these? I immediately remembered the text of the terrible note. Back in the orphanage, I was told about people who sell adopted children for organs. I have to call the police while we're still alive. I knew the phone was only in parents' room. I have to get there somehow. My parents strangely looked at me as we ate breakfast. It was as if they understood that I had discovered their secret. I got up from behind a table and told them I wasn't feeling well, but I actually went to their bedroom. Closing the door behind me, I immediately grabbed the phone and dialed the police number. Suddenly, something creaked behind me, as if there was someone else in the room. I fearfully turned around, but there was no one here. A voice said, "Hello, it's police station." I whispered all about the strange parents. The note and the cots. Do something. We'll soon be sold for organs. But the cop apparently thought it was a hoax and hung up. Then I got really scared. No one can help me. I decided to pull myself together. So if the police need proof, I'll find it. I'll start with a visit to Miss Larkin mentioned in the note. That same day, I decided to find her. There wasn't a soul in the area, but suddenly I noticed an old abandoned house. The door was open and a sign on it said, "Miss Larkin." I cautiously stepped inside. The house was terribly dirty. I went to the back of the room, and there, in a chair, in the middle of the cats, sat a terrible old woman with sparkling eyes. I said Bill and Irene were my parents, and the old woman grinned. It turns out that they already had a boy, Johnny, who also visited her sometimes. He said that his new parents praised his developed lungs. And then he disappeared. Seems like he was sent to a special school in Boston. Disappeared? So the note wasn't lying. I have to save all the children. When I got back, I noticed a guy my own age standing outside the house. His name was Rich, and he arrived this morning while I was away. He was adopted too. His parents died in a car accident, and he had long dreamed of finding a family again. I was ashamed to say that my real parents just left me and went somewhere in Vegas. But Rich seemed like a nice guy, so I told him. Then I realized I had to warn him. Terrible things are happening in this house, Richie. But he just laughed and thought I was joking. Then I called him into the room as I wanted to show him the note, but it had disappeared somewhere. I was desperate. But Rich said he believed me and was willing to help. But if we were in danger, he must make sure of it. First, we found in the internet that special school where Johnny allegedly went to study. But there was no one named Morris. So I suggested we search the house and we snuck into Bill's office. There were a lot of surgical instruments, some receipts, and cash calculations. And on the table, there was a notebook with the children's weights and heights. Do you believe me now? But Rich said it still didn't mean anything. We started arguing when we heard someone coming up the stairs and ran into another room. Rich said he'd had enough, and he didn't like the idea right away. We'd better stop doing this. I knew Rich wouldn't help me, but all my fears were confirmed. I had to run away from here today. Before dinner, Irene sternly called me into the living room. I was sure they already know that Richie and I had been going through their office. I went down the stairs without feeling my legs and found Richie standing helplessly in the middle of the living room. A nasty old man was patting him on the cheek. My parents introduced me and said that an elderly couple had come to visit us. They are their old acquaintances, and I must make friends with them. All evening, they asked us about our hobbies, patted us on the head and admired us, saying look how healthy they are. I was very scared. Why are they so interested in our health? After dinner, I saw how the old people give to our foster parents a package. It was clearly money. They sold us for organs. I waited until everyone was asleep and went to Richie. We have to run right now without waiting for the night. I burst into his room, but he wasn't there. Suddenly, someone put a hand on my shoulder. My stomach went cold with horror. Oh no, it was Irene. I started yelling, asking where is Richie? But she calmly replied that he had a nightmare and asked to sleep in their bed. In horror, I remembered the note again. The children disappear from the parents' bed. Irene strangely smiled and added that I could see it myself. I didn't want to go into the bedroom, but I had to make sure Richie was okay. I cautiously went into their room. Rich was indeed in the bed, peacefully sleeping. Maybe I'm really getting myself in mood. I felt relieved, so I crawled under the covers to him and immediately fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, Richie wasn't there. I looked around and realized it wasn't my parents' bedroom. Suddenly I heard footsteps, and a long shadow appeared in the doorway. I immediately pretended to be asleep. I felt someone bending over me and opened my eyes a little. It was the same old lady who visited us the day before. I screamed. What do you need and where is Richie? The old lady hesitantly said that Richie was gone. She wanted to reach out to me, but I immediately rushed out of the room. I ran into the kitchen and saw the old man there. He was holding a bloody knife, and something that looked like a human liver was lying on the table. I backed away and wanted to throw something at him, but something wet came under my hand. Oh no, it's Richie's t-shirt. It's covered in blood. I darted in the opposite direction and ran to the second floor. The old couple was coming up behind me. Judy, come to us. Don't be afraid. Then I rushed to the bathroom and climbed out through the window on the ledge down. I'm almost free, but it was too late, and a car with Irene and Bill came around the corner. I ran through the garden, but they grabbed me and dragged me into the house. No, you won't get my organs! I was screaming, trying to get away. Then I heard Richie's voice. He was standing in the middle of the living room, all safe and sound. Richie began to reassure me, saying that he was now the adopted son of my grandparents. Irene and Bill helped him find a family, but I still didn't believe it. What about the knife? The t-shirt, the bundle of money. The old couple smiled and said that Irene and Bill were helping those who were not officially allowed to adopt children. They take the children home and then transfer them to such families. The bundle was a thank you pie, and the knife was bloody because the old man was cutting up the steak for dinner. The t-shirt was stained by Richie himself in the morning when he opened the pomegranate syrup. At first, the old couple wanted to take only Richie, but seeing how we became friends, they decided to adopt me as well. But what about the missing Johnny? And all those surgical instruments? Bill good-naturedly laughed. It turned out that the boy wasn't lost. He now has a new family. They live nearby, and he was given to swimming. But their neighbor, Miss Larkins, has a very bad temper. That's why they didn't tell her anything. As for the instruments, Bill is a surgeon and all the instruments are from the hospital. Irene hugged me and apologized for sneaking us to the old couple's house last night. They just didn't want to wake us up. We slept so sweetly. I sipped my tea in silence for a while, trying to make sense of what happened, and then I burst into tears and asked everyone for forgiveness. Irene and Bill didn't look so bad now. They hugged me, and the old couple gave me a handkerchief. Apparently, I was so offended by my parents who abandoned me that I completely stopped believing that someone could take care of me. But now I understand there are still people who don't wish you harm. And you just have to learn to accept their help. We crept into my room by the fire escape so that we wouldn't be seen. Chuck was about to kiss me when suddenly, gosh, the footsteps! These are them! I told Chuck to hide, but he hesitated. My parents will kill you if they find you here with me. I blurted out and shoved Chuck into the closet, and a second later, my parents came in. Did they really hear us? I was afraid. My parents stood in the doorway and said nothing. My dad sat down next to me, took off his glasses, and finally said, "We've decided to adopt a child." What the? Are they crazy? I was totally against coddling a baby, but I didn't say anything out loud because I had to get them out of the room because Chuck was still in my closet. Well, yeah. Sure, since you've decided. I don't mind, I said quickly, trying to drown out the noise from the closet. Now can I, change my clothes? My parents were surprised at the urgency, and my father went out to the closet and suspiciously looked at it, and they left the room. We almost got burned, I said and let Chuck out. This should be celebrated. He winked, pulling a bottle from his pocket. Wow, at that moment, my father came back. He had forgotten his glasses. There was a scandal. Get out, you brat! Dad yelled, dragging Chuck out of the room by the scruff of the neck. I ran after them into the hallway, begging my dad not to touch my boyfriend. But my father wouldn't let up. No more going outs. You got it? Then Chuck broke free, smashed the window with something, and jumped out into the street. What a crazy guy he is. That's why I fell in love with him. My mother was calming my father down and said that I didn't think of his weak heart. They made me go back to my room and my father locked the door. In tears, I called Chuck. He was already hanging out at some party. I apologized for my father and cried that I was now under house arrest. And soon, there will be another child here, and my life will become unbearable. I want freedom. I want to be with you. I asked Chuck to help me escape, but he said it was a bad idea. My parents would turn the whole city upside down to find me. It's lousy when you have no family. Chuck continued, I'd like to be adopted. What do you mean? I was taken aback. And then Chuck said that he was from the orphan home. Gosh, I didn't know that. He's lucky. Nobody controls him. Wait, what if my parents adopt him? Then he will be able to hang out in my room and it won't arouse suspicion. Chuck was worried that my father would recognize him and get in trouble. We decided that we would change his haircut, wash off the emo coloring, and get dressed neatly. My parents would love him. The day of the trip to the orphan home came. I asked my parents to go there with them and found out which boy they chose. Everything went according to plan. I'd met with Chuck at the orphanage, and we'd gotten rid of the kid for a while. Chuck had promised to take him to a biker race if my parents didn't see him. Chuck was unrecognizable. He played a whole performance in front of my parents. He told them how he likes to fix cars and is fond of homemade pastries. He even baked cookies himself. My mother was delighted with him, but my father was still doubtful. In addition, they were worried about the 10-year-old boy they had previously seen. After all, they were thinking about him for so long. We went to look for him in the yard, and then my father was attacked by a dog. Chuck instantly reacted and drove it away. Wow. I hinted to my dad that a 16-year-old boy is a much better option, and there's less fuss with him and much more help. In the end, my parents agreed, and a week later, Chuck could leave with us. When we got home, Chuck moved into the room next to mine. Now we will be together all the time. The first day, I was waiting for him after school, but he didn't come. As it turned out, my parents had already enrolled him in the sports section. Wow. And the next night, he was busy doing his homework. I was looking forward to the weekend, but Chuck spent it helping my parents around the house. I couldn't believe my eyes. Where was that freaky rebel I fell in love with? He even studied better than I did. Chuck made excuses saying he was interested in a lot of things and it was difficult to do everything in time. Then I asked my father to reduce his load, but he ignored me. In the end, Mom and Dad spent days talking to Chuck. Parents seem to have forgotten that they have their own daughter. They didn't even care how I dressed or what time I got home. And Chuck continued to behave like an obedient son. We didn't go out together at all. I was hoping things would get better after the night of the rock concert. The concert was announced a month ago, and the teenagers weren't allowed in. But Chuck promised to arrange it. We agreed to meet at the entrance, but I ended up freaking outside for hours, and he never came. When I got home, Chuck said that he and my father had an urgent business in the garage. He seems to have gotten used to the good boy role and forgotten that he's here for me. I have to show him how easily he can lose my parents' favor. While he was in class, I made a mess of his room, and then I put cigarettes pack in his jacket. I spent the whole evening waiting for it to be found. A day later, I broke Dad's screwdriver in the garage and left Chuck's cap on it. I was hoping that after this, my parents would cool off and Chuck would think more of me. But in the end, even my father reacted calmly to all that, saying that the guy needs time to adapt. But Chuck was really mad at me. "Why are you setting me up?" he asked me once. "What else should I do?" I said he was my boyfriend, not my boring parents' perfect son. But Chuck said I had a great family and I was just being selfish. "Oh, really? Then I'm gonna tell them that you're actually a ragamuffin who used them," I shouted and ran to the door. Chuck turned pale and grabbing my hand said, "You wouldn't dare." "We'll see." I broke away and ran into the living room to my parents. I blurted it out to them right away. Chuck was only pretending to be a good boy, and that he was the boy my parents saw in the closet that day. My father was enraged instantly. He yelled that I had shamelessly deceived them, and then Dad suddenly froze. He swayed, croaked something, and started to fall, holding his heart. Oh my God! From shock, my mother and I did not know what to do, and only Chuck didn't lose his head. He yelled Mom to call 911, ran up to Dad, and started doing heart massage. What if Dad doesn't help? And Dad, I won't forgive myself for this. When the doctors arrived, my father's condition was really bad. He was taken to the hospital. My mother and I accompanied him and waited in the waiting room all evening. It was just painful. Finally, the doctor came out and said that Dad was in a coma, but without first aid, he wouldn't have survived at all. It's all thanks to Chuck. We were forbidden to stay the night there, so we came home. But we couldn't find Chuck and all his belongings were gone from his room. I understood that Chuck ran away. Everything collapsed in an instant. I felt terrible. I'm the reason my dad's in the hospital. Why did I turn in Chuck? My parents were so attached to him. They were happy when he lived with us. And now we need to find Chuck and apologize. Mom suggested we go to the orphan home together. What if he went back there? The next day, she baked Chuck a pie and went there. But the caretaker said Chuck never came back. We were very upset and were about to leave when suddenly, I heard the orphans' conversation. All their squad was going to the nightclub this night. Chuck's probably there. We went to that nightclub and struggled through the crowd. Looking around, here he is. Chuck tried to run away again, but I stopped him and forced myself to say, "It was hard for me to accept how much you've changed. I don't know what's between us right now, but my family needs you." Chuck hesitated, but then Mom came over and handed him a piece of pie. "You must be hungry." Then Chuck looked confused and stared at the floor. He didn't know what to say. His freaky parents, standing around, stared at us in disbelief. Finally, Chuck looked up, smiled and said, "Your home is the best food in the world." We laughed and hugged. Seems like he really has become a part of our family. We left the nightclub and then we got a call from the hospital. They said my father has emerged from coma. We rushed there and ran into his room. Thank God, Dad is fine. Mom and I rushed to hug him, and only Chuck was left standing awkwardly in the corner. Then Dad noticed him and called him over. "Thank you," he softly said to Chuck and tightly hugged him. We all returned home together. I thought my father would hate me after my scam, but we ended up being more careful of each other. I apologized and stopped arguing with him, and Dad realized that he was strict with me. Chuck got along well with Dad and actually even shared his interests. Parents no longer worried that their foster son was a freak. They thought Chuck was a good person and didn't mind us dating. The only thing we still have to decide is, who are we to each other?
Dad and I haven't seen each other for a year while I was in college, and finally the holidays began. I was home. The door opened, but instead of my father, I saw my former classmate Bonnie. She used to take my money for lunches by force and tease me, a girl with a complex of the excellent pupil. I didn't understand what she was doing here. But Bonnie joyfully showed off the ring and added that she was my father's fiancée. What is this? A prank? Dad came out and said he was happy for my return. And then, like nothing happened, he went to the kitchen to warm up dinner. 3 years ago, Dad divorced my mom because of her addiction to gambling. It wasn't easy for me, but I was a strong spirit. I coped. She even played with me for money and was always angry when I was winning. My father barely recovered after my mom left. I then took over all the businesses around the house, supported him while he struggled with depression. We were very close during this time. I loved Dad a lot. I swore to myself I wouldn't follow in her footsteps. I was hoping Dad's new girlfriend would be good. But it was clearly not about Bonnie. In school, she only mocked everyone around. All evening, she didn't give me a word to insert, was chirping about something and rubbing the diamond earrings that Dad gave her. Yeah, he probably spent a lot of money on them. It was nasty for me to look at her, and I went to wash the dishes, but my newly minted stepmother followed me. She suddenly decided to apologize for everything that was between us at school. And she also said she loved my dad for real. Yeah, of course, Dad was fascinated by her, and she embezzled money from him. I didn't believe one word of her. I needed to open Dad's eyes as soon as possible. I planned to spend all the holidays here, so I decided to follow Bonnie's every step. She would certainly give herself away. And on the second day, I noticed that Bonnie was constantly calling someone. And when I went into the room, she immediately stopped the call. "What are you hiding, Bonnie?" While she was in the shower, I made my way to look around her room. I saw some plays of paper on the shelf. There was a phone number and the name Carl. Was he her lover? I took a piece of paper to myself. It would be useful to expose Bonnie at the right moment. But most suspiciously, when my dad lingered at work late, Bonnie always left. I once asked her where she was going, but Bonnie answered calmly that to yoga. All dolled up in a tight dress to yoga. I called Dad and asked the address of the yoga center. I lied that I wanted to pick up Bonnie after class. Oddly enough, he was aware. Dad was very happy that I finally decided to make friends with my stepmother, and I immediately went to the address. Of course, Bonnie was not there because the yoga center was closed for repair. That's the end of your relationship, Bonnie. While I was away, Dad came home. I broke into the living room and already wanted to tell about the fact that Bonnie had a lover. But Dad was concerned about something. He looked coldly at me and said a large amount of money was missing from the house. Suddenly, someone called him. It was an urgent call. I didn't even have time to say it was Bonnie's fault. Finally, he added that if there was no money before he arrived, it would be necessary to take measures. I went to my room. I was bitter. Dad always trusted me, and now he suspected me of stealing because of this stinker. I knew Bonnie had taken the money. I only had to make her return everything until my dad came back. This time, I decided to be careful and the same evening followed the cab that Bonnie was in. But on the way, my car stalled. Oh man, I could not lose sight of Bonnie. Then I jumped out in the middle of the road and stopped the first car. I begged the driver to catch up with the taxi, but he asked for a giant amount. It was all my money, hit or miss. I agreed, and we followed. Bonnie came out outside some hotel, so that's where you're relaxing with your lover. You're not getting away with it now. I got out of the car and quickly followed her to the hotel. I watched as Bonnie walked up the elevator, but unexpectedly, she headed to the stairs and went down to the basement floor. Where was she going? I immediately ran after Bonnie. There was an iron door downstairs. Strange, but there was no sign. I gently pulled the handle, and I found myself in a huge hall. There were slot machines and women in long dresses everywhere. I ended up in an underground casino. But where was Bonnie? I began to look back restlessly, and suddenly I saw Bonnie in the crowd. She was probably going to meet that Carl right now. But Bonnie sat down at the card table. I couldn't let her waste Dad's money. So I came close to her and threw a paper on the table with the phone number of her lover Carl, which I took from Bonnie's room. Explain everything immediately. She was so scared. She began to babble about her addiction. that she could not resist gambling. And she began begging not to say anything to Dad. No way, we were so tormented with Mom's poker addiction. And now there's you. 2 security guards approached us. What do you need? But one of them just crudely grabbed Bonnie by the arm and led somewhere. Damn, what is going on in here? The second guard suspiciously asked me if everything was okay. I felt a chill down my spine. I realized that I had to get away from him as soon as possible, and I said I just needed to go to the ladies' room. For a second, I felt scared, because the type that grabbed her looked very intimidating. So as soon as the guard turned away, I followed Bonnie unnoticed. The door to the room where she was brought was opened. I looked inside and saw Bonnie standing in front of some man. She called him Carl and sobbing, asked to wait with her dad. Carl showed the guard on her handbag. And the guard answering, "Okay, boss," took it away from Bonnie. He dropped all the contents of the handbag on the table, and I saw a wad of money. Everything was immediately clear to me. I knew that Bonnie was a thief. The boss got a pack of bills from there and began to recount. At this point, someone sharply put their hand on my shoulder. I turned around. It was the second guard from the hall. He said the toilet was not here. I dashed to the exit, but he grabbed me and dragged me into the office to the boss. Seeing me, Bonnie rushed in my direction, but the guard held her off. I begged to let me go, but the boss only nodded to the guard. Panicked, I tried to hold on to something and grab the boss's jacket. Suddenly, a gold card of the poker club fell out of his inner pocket. Such were given only to the coolest players. Mom had the same, and then I got a crazy idea. I grabbed the card and threw it on the table to the boss. "This trinket is given to everyone in a row. I'll easily beat you." For a second, I noticed the boss's eyes glittered. So I hit the point in a faltering voice. I offered to play for my and Bonnie's freedom and forgiveness of her dad. And in case of losing, he could do to me and Bonnie everything he wanted. The guard tried to dissuade his boss, but the boss gave me a sign. And I was sat down opposite. Bonnie was shaking with fear and looking at me with hope. I was afraid to, but the game had already started. I tried to remember all my mom's poker commandments. Be they damned, and strangely enough, I was lucky. At the end of the game, I even almost got into my hand the coolest combination of flash royals. There was only one card left, but when I pulled it out, the hope of winning collapsed. I raised my eyes to the boss. Judging his smile, he clearly pulled a good card. I panicked. My hands started sweating. He was going to win now. Things were bad. Suddenly, I felt someone's hand on my knee. It was Bonnie. I looked at her with surprise. She winked at me. I looked carefully and found a Dubé ace on my knee. We were saved. I proudly laid out a royal flush, and the boss, seeing this, hatefully threw the cards on the floor. Bonnie, we're free. But the boss bared his teeth. Not so fast. Hey, we got a bet, but the guards already surrounded us. I pulled away and ran up to the switch. Turning off the light, I grabbed Bonnie and immediately popped out of the office. We ran to the exit, pushing people and hitting slot machines. We were almost at the exit, and then I heard someone scream. I turned around and saw the boss grab Bonnie. She couldn't run. Damn, I was so close to the exit, but still couldn't leave her in his clutches. Then I pushed the boss away from Bonnie with all my strength and tightly grasped her hand, dragging her to the exit. People looked scarred at us, but we didn't care. We ran out into the street and the guards kept chasing us. We rushed away as fast as we could. Only a couple of blocks later, they fell behind and we stopped to rest. I blurted out that if it weren't for the light, anything could have happened. To which Bonnie enthusiastically said it was her best game. And then she got cards out of her sleeve. Bonnie said she always tried to swindle, but it never worked. And you're good. But then I remembered that we got mixed up in it because of her. Forgive me, she said. Bonnie said she had gambling problems in school. Her parents were alcoholics, and she could only feed herself by playing poker and taking money away from other children. Suddenly, Bonnie extended me Dad's money. It turned out she managed to grab them from Carl's table, and she added that she would no longer interfere with my dad and me. He hardly needed a wife like that. After that phrase, Bonnie turned around and walked away. Bonnie finally left us alone. But my stomach just dropped for some reason. What if she just got really confused? So I caught up with Bonnie and said I wouldn't tell my father anything if she agreed to be treated for her addiction. That would be our secret. Bonnie was moved and hugged me. And then I remembered my mom. Maybe I was too harsh on her. I didn't even wonder where she got this addiction from and didn't help her struggle with it. When we came home, Dad was already waiting for us. I gave him the money and told him Bonnie and I found it behind the couch. He was very happy and also said, "I'm glad that you finally made friends." And then I thought maybe we could really be friends in the future. I left them alone and decided to call my mom. She and I talked for the first time in many years, and I apologized for not even trying to understand her. Mom was grateful that I gave her a chance and we arranged to meet. It sounded like she was crying quietly. We both seemed ready to start afresh. I'll see you soon, Mom.